You took the vacation, you slept in a little bit, you did everything that people are telling you to do, and yet you still come back feeling exactly the same within a matter of weeks. People seem to think that there's some sort of rest problem that we're all experiencing. It's not that at all. It's a structural problem. You see, the symptoms that you've been calling burnout are not random. They're a predictable output of 5 specific things happening inside your system right now that are keeping you working and unable to turn off. And once you understand what they are, you will never confuse them with overwork or burnout ever again. Quick context, I'm Jesse Hoffman, performance coach and creator of the Clarity Code. I work with entrepreneurs who are already doing really well on paper, but feel like they're running on empty and can't figure out why. And the common pattern that I see before we fix anything else is almost always the same. High output, high effort, high returns a lot of the time, but it comes at a cost because the system doesn't know how to switch off. So let's dive in. I'm gonna name each one of them and show you what it looks like when they're running and show you the changes and what happens when they get addressed. And by the end of this video, you're gonna have a clear picture of exactly what's keeping your system churning. The first reason why your brain cannot switch off is that it was never given the permission to. And I don't mean consciously, I mean structurally. You've unknowingly created a structure that leads to endless open loops. And your brain naturally maintains a heightened activation around every unfinished task. This is what we now call the Zeigarnik effect. And this data was confirmed and popularized by a psychologist named Zeigarnik. What it confirms is that every open project, every unresolved decision, every commitment that you have not closed is running in the background. It's sitting right there as this active file in your working memory. And I don't mean occasionally. It's not just when this unfinished thing pops into your mind. No, it is running there continuously, whether you're at your desk or in bed trying to wind down for the night. And so in a high output environment, for a lot of entrepreneurs, they're carrying 20 or 40 of these simultaneously. All the things that they have on their radar. And that means that 20 to 40 open processes are running in the background at all times. And so therefore, the system, it cannot shut off because it was never really told that it was safe to. Because quite simply, your brain does not care whether it's actively working on something. If it's unresolved, it's running. That's all there is to it. There are studies that confirm that under a high cognitive load, meaning there's a lot of things weighing down your cognition, decision accuracy drops from roughly 89, technically 89.4% to 42.1%. And so that means you could give me 2 identical people and put a lot of open loops into one of them and just a few into the other. You can have the same person, the same skill set, and less than half the quality of the output purely from the number of open loops and open conditions that are created. And so closing loops deliberately, not just finishing tasks, that's what gives your system the permission to downregulate and come back to baseline. And so what's crucial is having a structured decision filter or processing filter that can tell the brain which loops are closed for today. And that's the difference between a mind that can actually rest and one that can't. Most high performers aren't exhausted from what they're doing. They're exhausted from what they're not finishing. The second reason that gets most people is that there's no psychological endpoint to the day. And that's usually because the work that you're doing never felt like it was yours to begin with. Now, what do I mean by that? How often do you actually check yourself and understand why you're doing what you're doing? When the work you're doing is genuinely aligned with who you are, there's a natural felt sense of completion at the end of a work session. You did the thing, you finished it. It belongs to you, it felt aligned, and now you can put it down. And maybe you can argue you get energy from that. But on the flip side, when the work is misaligned, that felt sense of accomplishment, of completion, it never really arrives because it didn't have much meaning to begin with. You finish the tasks, but the psychological weight of them doesn't leave. You can check off the box, sure, but then you go and you lie down and your mind keeps running because somewhere underneath there, you know you've been spending so much energy on something that doesn't actually belong to your identity. And that tension, that cannot be dissolved just because you close your laptop. And I've worked with so many people in different industries to be able to compare and contrast. It's so fascinating because you can have one person that works 60 hours and feels totally clear and light at the end of the day. and then have someone else that's working 35 hours, but then feels so psychologically depleted because they're just running all night and they can't control it. And you have to wonder why that is. And that's because the variable is not hours worked, it's whether the work belongs to who you actually are. It's whether that work is actually fulfilling and meaningful. I want to go deeper into the research of Robert Vallerand. He's a researcher who identified two distinct types of passion. On one hand, you have harmonious passion, and that's work that's chosen freely by you because it aligns with your identity. And people in this state of harmonious passion, they can disengage from work very cleanly because it's all self-determined. And so the system is able to switch off. But on the other hand, you have obsessive passion. And that's work that's driven by external pressures, by status, by fear, by judgment, by validation. And people in that state, they cannot possibly disengage fully. The work follows them because it's extrinsically determined. And so therefore, the system stays running because they have no control over it. And so if you find yourself in either of these boats, the difference isn't what you're doing, from the standpoint of output, the difference is the relationship between your work and your identity. So again, if we were to use the same example, two identical people working the same amount of hours, same output demands, they will each have totally different experiences at the end of the day. One is able to disengage and rest, one is not. And this I've come to believe is one of the central tenets to why people experience what they call burnout. Misalignment doesn't just drain you during your work. It keeps you working when you're supposed to be off because of that external control, or really the lack of control. The third reason is that people are constantly depleting their system at the wrong times and then asking it to recover when it has nothing left to recover with. And that's a result of all the productivity hacks and trends out there. Time management, time blocking. Most entrepreneurs schedule their most demanding work around their availability. Oh, here's an open space. Time block it. Whatever slot is open, that's where the important work should go, right? Maximize your time. Wrong. Because if you're just grasping for an open time to do your important work, that means that your system is being pushed the hardest during windows when it might not necessarily be operating at maximum capacity. If anything, it's likely operating at a reduced capacity. And so the result of that is that by the time the workday ends, the system's been running so far past its natural recovery windows that it can't down-regulate on schedule because there was no real discretion behind what tasks were executed on at what times based on your energy rhythms. And so one thing that we can understand through neuroscience is that your energy actually moves in very predictable cycles across the day. You hit your peaks, you fall into your troughs, and then you recover back up on the way to your energy peak windows. And so tracking and protecting those peak windows for your highest cognitive demand tasks means that your system is naturally depleting and has time to restore before the end of the day. And a lot of people make the direct mistake of scheduling demanding work in the troughs, which is what availability-based scheduling almost always produces. And so that means that your system is never really able to get that depletion recovery rhythm it needs to switch off cleanly. And I specifically fix this through what I call energy architecture. And that's when you stop scheduling by your availability and you start scheduling by your energy state and your energy rhythms. And just that one shift, that will change entirely how you feel at the end of each day. If you're finding this useful and you're starting to see how each of these first three variables can really apply to you right now or people that you know, hit the subscribe button. So let's dive into these last two variables. The fourth reason is that the way that you are recovering does not match the type of depletion that you're experiencing or creating. And so that means that the system will never actually restore. Now, the two overarching types of recovery are passive and active. For a lot of people, you might finish work, you sit down on the couch, you scroll a little bit, you try to turn your brain off, you watch something, and your body is still, so you're telling yourself, I had a long day, I deserve to sit back and relax. And you tell yourself that you're resting. But specifically for the people I work with, the type of fatigue that an entrepreneur carries at the end of a high output, high stress day, it's rarely a physical fatigue. It's cognitive, it's emotional, it's mental, psychological, or a combination of any of those. And yes, those are all different things. And in that case, passive consumption, passive rest of scrolling, watching, whatever, that's not going to restore cognitive or emotional depletion. That's going to occupy your system, your brain, at a lower frequency to distract it. And so maybe your drain will slow down a bit because you're not stressing out actively over everything on your mind, but it will not stop the drain. And more importantly, it won't reverse it to allow you to recover. And so this is why you can spend an entire evening doing nothing and still wake up feeling unrested. Your system was never actually off. It was just idling, if you want to call it that. And so when you're recovering, you need to remember, passive rest creates the feeling of recovery without producing real recovery. Your recovery has to match the depletion type in order to restore your system. Let me dive into one client example. This one probably applies to anyone across the board, but this specific client was a high-ticket sales rep. Someone that was on high stakes conversations all day, nonstop throughout the day, back to back to back, with some gaps in between. And when we first started working together, I found that between their calls, they would get really jacked up when they got a close, and then just crash so hard when they got rejected or got hit with too many objections and couldn't overcome them. And they were going up and down on this roller coaster of emotions nonstop throughout the day. On top of that, between their calls, what were they doing? Scrolling social media, amping themselves up to sell the next person and all these things. In the moments between their calls where they had at least, let's say 10, 15, 20 minutes, we started to implement intentional decompression time where they were banned from any stimulus. Their only option between calls was go and grab a drink of water, go and take a shit if you need to, otherwise stare at the fucking wall. And that's what it took for them to be able to process out all of those emotions, all of those chemicals flooding in the brain, the dopamine, the adrenaline, the cortisol. That's what it took for them to be able to quiet down and start to recover cognitively. And so after just 30 to 40 days of being intentional with just this one thing, they felt their energy totally shift coming out of their calls each day. And we even tied it to the sleep score, and we can say that there was a correlation in the improvement of their sleep score just by how they managed their energy and their cognition between their calls. But again, it's important to note, I didn't just have them go to the gym and do all these other things to restore cognitively, because that's not what would have fixed it. And so that brings us to the fifth and final reason why your system cannot shut off. And this one is the most invisible, stealthy one of them all. And it's also what makes the other four even harder to address if this one is out of alignment. Your system is running an outdated version of you that was never given the permission to rest. And that's what I call identity lag, which is when there's a gap between who you know you need to be and who you're still behaving as. The version of you that built your business, that got you to where you are right now, that was grinding through all those early stages, that was operating in survival mode with a chip on your shoulder and wore exhaustion and burnout as that badge. That version of you had an identity built around always being on and needing to be so in order to get to where you needed to be. You were always available, always the one who was figuring things out and just fucking taking action and grinding and being disciplined. But guess what? The business has changed. You found a little bit of success. You know that there's a level that you're not reaching. Your capacity has changed. But the behavioral operating system, the way that you're showing up each day, is still that same person that got you to where you are. And that version doesn't have an off switch because it was built in an environment and trained through an environment that felt like turning off was dangerous and threatening, like you would lose it all. And maybe at that time you felt like you had something to prove. And so ego took a hold of you. But now you know that's not what's gonna get you to the next level. No strategy, no amount of harder work will solve the plateau that you're facing right now. And the brutal reality of it is you cannot switch off as a version of yourself that was built to never stop. And so that identity has to be updated before the behavior can be. And where you might see this show up is through the inability to disconnect. Even when there's really nothing urgent requiring your attention, you feel that constant draw to checking the Slack channel or going into your emails, maybe looking at your Stripe account. The felt sense of needing to be available to people because you're the one that was doing it all, or needing to check in, stay close to the work, even when you told yourself that you were going to take this time off. It might show up even subtly as that felt sense of needing to be available, needing to check in, needing to stay close to the work during time that really was supposed to be your downtime, because you were the person that was doing it all and you haven't moved past that. Not because the business needs that right now, but because your identity was formed in that period when it did. If any of that resonated, then that's a sign that you need to update that internal picture of who you are and how you lead and how you operate. And that is structural work. That's not just a simple mindset exercise that's going to suddenly take you to the next level. And I'm not even going to give you a specific client example on this one because it is every single fucking one. The founder who built their business from scratch, put everything together, made every decision, was in every room they needed to be in, the identity of the person that built the company. This happens with all of them. The business grows, the revenue is strong, the team is in place, they maybe have a few systems in place, but the founder is more exhausted than they were when it was just them. And now they feel the golden handcuffs and they wonder, how did I get here? And that's when they realize they are the reason their business is stagnating. But the most expensive thing that you can do is to keep running an operating system that was built for a version of your life that you've already left behind, that you've already surpassed. Each of these 5 variables do not operate in isolation. They compound with one another. Your cognitive load is keeping your system running in the background with all those open loops, all those open files. Your values misalignment is partly what's creating some of those open files because you're grabbing onto shit and you don't even know why. And so that means that there's no psychological endpoint to the day. You're constantly picking up new things. And then there's your energy architecture or your misarchitecture, your misalignment of energy, and not being able to allocate the right windows for the right tasks that you're picking up for God knows what reason. And that means that your system is being depleted past its natural recovery windows. And all of that passive recovery means that the restoration is never actually happening. And all of this, both at the same time, stems from and contributes to and creates the identity lag, which is that version of you that's running all of this through a system that was never built to have an off switch to begin with, and is directly keeping you from figuring out, how the fuck do I install an off switch? That's why addressing one variable in isolation, it might produce some sort of temporary relief at best, but the system as a whole needs to be looked at as such, as a system. And that's where the clear diagnostic comes into play, which is being able to measure each of these for yourself. If you're ready to work on this directly, there's a link below to apply to work with me. We'll jump on a full coaching session. If you'd rather fill out that clear diagnostic, you can go ahead and do that below as well. And if you want to understand exactly how this became the state of modern performance today, why we see it across the board, and why every era of technological and industrial and business acceleration has produced the same pattern under a slightly different name or disguise, watch that video next right here. I'll talk to you in the next one. Peace.